Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Sending a warm welcome to everyone here with us. This session will discuss how we can communicate impact to foster a culture of learning, adaptation, and honest reflection in the community services sector. I'm Nadia, the Data and Reporting Officer, and I work in the Research and Policy team at QCOS, the Queensland Council of Social Service. QCOS is the peak body for community services in Queensland, and our vision is to achieve equality, opportunity, and well-being for every person in every community across Queensland. QCOS acknowledges the historical injustice of colonisation and dispossession on First Nations peoples and its ongoing impact and legacies. We are committed to reconciliation, self-determination and opportunity for First Nations peoples as integral steps in achieving equality, opportunity and well-being for all Queenslanders. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the oldest continuing cultures, diverse languages and knowledge holders in human history. I am joining you from Meanjin in Brisbane, and I respectfully acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people and all First Nations colleagues and friends online in the webinar today. For those of you online in the meeting today, please feel free to join us in acknowledging country where you are today through the chat function. The agenda for today's session will have the presentation on communicating impact with data, followed by a Q&A, then a poll and some information about upcoming events. A couple of things to note. By default, you will be on mute, but your camera will be turned on. This session will be recorded. If during this session you would like to ask a question, you can write the question in the chat function. If we run out of time, we can follow up with you individually after the session. Just pop your question or comment in the chat pane. As the world of AI is ever evolving, there is an increasing potential presence of AI bots like Read AI in our webinars. The presence of these bots can potentially lead to privacy concerns by harvesting information and distributing session content. We will stay vigilant in removing these bots from our meetings, but ask if you see either an AI bot or shared material to please let us know. I would like to now welcome and introduce our guest speaker for today, Jen Riley, Chief Impact Officer at our community. Jen has over 20 years of experience working in the social sector and is passionate about bringing together lived experience, evidence and practice to achieve real outcomes for people and communities. Members of our network have expressed an interest in learning more about impact reporting, measuring impact and communicating impact. So we connected with Jen and asked her to come along today to discuss how the community service sector can use data to better communicate impact within their own organizations, including how organizations can balance data, transparency, and context to drive meaningful change in the sector and understand and overcome barriers to effective impact measurement and evaluation. Thanks so much for joining us, Jen. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Nadia, and hello and welcome everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. We'll get going. Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that I'm on today. I'm on the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, or Naarm, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people on this call. So I'm here to talk about communicating impact today, and I'm going to get myself on the screen. It's always a little bit when you get yourself going, and I'll remove that so it's not in the way of everyone. So thank you, Nadia. You did a quick introduction, and yeah, I have worked for not-for-profits, and I've worked also at a stint in government working in Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander employment programs in the Department of Employment for a few years. But for the last 10 years, I've been working more on the service side, working on outcome measurement, monitoring and evaluation, supporting both not-for-profits, service delivery organisations, but also funders. And part of my role at SmartyGrants, which is the grant management software system that many of you have used, is actually working with grant makers. And I've also been on a number of not-for-profit boards as well. So one of the things that started this conversation with Nadia and Amy was an article that I wrote late last year, and perhaps we could provide a link to it afterwards, about rethinking more data and rethinking this idea of better data. And I think for me, I was frustrated by this calls for more data, which came out of the Centre for Evidence and Implementation, because what I was seeing was data flowing into reporting systems at SmartyGrants, and I was seeing a lot of this data. There's a lot of positive data coming through, and lots of, I guess, polish that's going on, and to the point where I've had grant makers saying, I'm not sure I can use this data. It's so positive, what's going on. We're not hearing what's, some of the challenges that are going on. And so I wanted to call out this elephant in the room, that there is a culture of, there's a systemic issue going on around perfectionism when it comes to communicating data. And having worked with not-for-profits, I know that we underreport challenges, and that's because of the power dynamic between funders and not-for-profits. But I'm also seeing on the other side of the fence, working with funders now, how over-polished data can actually erode trust and obscure learning. So I think we need a much more open and reflective practice between funders and grantees, so that we can understand what is working and what can be done better. So that was part of my call, was really for a better measurement and reporting culture, not necessarily more and more data and more bean counters. So that was my call for this, and sort of what started this conversation about me presenting to you guys today. So today I'm going to discuss balancing data transparency and context, overcoming some of the barriers to impact measurement and some of these cultural challenges, and then communicating impact to drive learning and change. So the first thing I wanted to talk to was about data and how we make data useful, not just accurate, but also honest and meaningful. So we're going to unpack these three ingredients that must work together. Because if you have data but no context, you risk misinterpretation. And if you have data without transparency, you risk mistrust. And if you have transparency without data, you risk storytelling without accountability. So we really do need all three working together. I'm going to take you into a really practical example of a report. And this is an example of a thing many of us might receive as a manager or as a funder or a board member. And it's technically correct. But as the recipient of this information, we don't know what it's answering, why it matters, or what to do with it. So I'm going to perhaps make some suggestions on how we can communicate this better. I think one of the key things is we've got to reduce the jargon and replace those titles with clear question-based titles. So instead of participant ratings of program responsiveness to individual needs, which makes everyone's head hurt, just put the simple question, did we meet the participants' needs? And then the data should answer that question. But I'm also recommending that we also provide some interpretation with graphs rather than just give it to people. A bit of a what, so what, now what, and I'll give you an example, really helps the person looking at this data to make sense of it and understand what's needed. And of course, and actually I think we are quite good at this, but linking this graph to the context and a participant story. So here we go. This was the report. Let's have a go at changing these titles. So what we've done here is we've just replaced these very wordy, jargony titles just with these simple questions so that we know what these graphs are about and it's easier to interpret. And people also instantly understand why it matters. So this is the first shift. Try and turn your data titles or your dashboard titles or your reports into questions, because I think data is only useful if it answers something. Okay, the next is to provide a level of interpretation. Don't just give the graph, giving this what, so what, and now what, which is often used in developmental evaluation. So this is what we've done here. So here we've done a quick summary that the majority said program mostly met their needs. Fewer said completely, some said a little or not at all. So all of a sudden it makes sense, especially for people that aren't used to looking at data and widgets like this all day. So what does this mean? It means the program is on the right track, but there are some gaps for a minority of people. And now what? So we need to explore the unmet needs through follow-up. And our aim, perhaps the next round the program is run or the next cohort, is to shift participants to completely met in terms of their needs. So this helps people understand the data in context and connect it to action. And this is really important for the learning loops as well. So I've gone ahead and filled this out for the next two as well. So you can see it's a simple method, but all of a sudden it makes it a lot more interesting and a lot more useful. And you're not leaving the person to do the work. I've actually just reworked the title there as well. How well did we deliver the program? So we're being very clear about what this communication piece is about. And this, for our results-based accountability fans, this is an important question. It's one of your key questions. The third and really important piece here is to present these graphs with some context. So, for instance, putting, where was the program or the service delivered? Who was it being delivered to? And what was the aim of the program? I'll put some information in there about it being delivered in a rural community for young trans people, and it aims to create a safe, affirming place for people. All of a sudden, that data means something. Also putting in a story, and of course you can change the name to protect privacy and don't put any elements in there that can identify them, or ask, and of course ask permission. But you have heard that expression, no data without stories, no stories without data. We do need both sides because it does bring more life and the human element to that data. So having this sort of mixture of things, of titles that are around questions, around putting a bit more information about the what, so what, now what, and also putting in that story, it really supports what we're trying to say in that action, that these programs are important and they offer more than support, they offer recognition and belonging. Altogether, that provides quite a comprehensive package. So I'm going to move on to sort of overcoming barriers to effective impact measurement. And my hunch is that organisations have data. You have a lot of data. I'm curious about why you think that we're not using it, or if we are using it, perhaps it could be used in better ways. So I'm curious in the chat if people wouldn't mind sharing what you think, what are some of the barriers to effective impact measurement. Have a look at the chat. Being very quiet, giving you all a minute to think. What's relevant? That's really, really cool. That's a good one. Not aware of the risks. Okay. Don't want to even try sometimes. Yeah, people are very risk averse. Research questions are not clear. Yep, concern it may be misinterpreted. Yep, time is always comes up. Trust. Client engagement. Yeah, there's a lot of survey fatigue out there, Sarah. I hear you. Having the right tools in place. Yes, often we're collecting the data for reporting requirements, but that is less useful data. Thomas, that's a very interesting one, and something I'm working with grant makers a lot to say, is this data useful for the grantees or is it just useful for you? Yeah, so I think that's really, really important. Also believing you have to be an expert. There's biases. Yes, Peter. There's a lot in here, and I think you've named a lot of it actually. There's a lot of what we call sort of technical, sort of skills in understanding privacy and consent or understanding how to use tools. But there's also those sort of we call adaptive challenges. So they're more beliefs, values, things that are stopping people from using impact measurement. As I think Susan's called out, no impact measurement culture. So there is a beliefs and values system at work here. It's not just the technicals, not just the skills, it's also understanding. Wow, Sam, yeah, that's a hard one. Lack of willingness to assess broader system integrity, meeting client holistic needs. This is not relevant to how we deliver services. I've heard that one. That's a shocker and a heartbreaking one, that one. Yeah. This is a huge cultural change. Yeah. I think you can have all the skills, and skills are actually pretty easy to get. But I think, and that issue around time, and the reality is we create time for what we value. So if you're hearing it's a time resources, what you're hearing is it's not valued or it's too risky or, there's a whole bunch of other things going on there. Thank you so much for sharing so honestly, team, with some of the things that are going on. And I think probably it's useful for you to hear as a network that you're not alone. This is definitely a challenge for us in going forward. Okay, I'm going to share some of my thoughts. Really appreciate that and the honesty of that. Now I've lost my screen. Okay, so why is this so hard? Yeah. I think there's some big things going on, all of the stuff that you all mentioned. This fear of funding consequences, I think, drives a lot of that as well. I had a CEO who spoke to me once and they discovered a really critical insight about their own internal data. And they realized that intake process wasn't trauma-informed enough for vulnerable clients. And it was this really great insight. I'm like, why aren't we sharing this? We should share this insight with other organizations doing similar work. And that CEO replied, no way, admitting this, it looks like we don't know what we're doing. So there's sort of a competitiveness sitting under that. There's, reputation. There's a whole bunch of things when people are like, we're not sharing. And so, and I think there's a perception out there that funders still reward success stories, not learning stories. And that fear shapes what gets reported. And I also think there is huge pressure to look good, especially for particular executives. They feel it's their reputation on the line. But as I said, I've seen these reports claiming 100% of outcomes are met. And yes, it looks amazing, but in reality, it actually raises red flags because if everything's going perfectly, quite honestly, something is off. Like either the program is playing it too safe or the data's been overly polished. And in terms of this overuse of polished comms, and we've all seen these beautiful impact reports, but the thing is that becomes a barrier. It smooths over the rough edges of the reality of the work that we all do. And you work in complex, messy communities where there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the system. There's system issues, cost of living, homelessness, sort of access to housing. There's health system issues. It's a really complicated system. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a job and everyone would be fine. So when we remove those bumps and challenges, we lose the chance to show what's really going on in terms of resilience and adaptation that is going on inside organisations. And that is the real gold. And you do it every day. You're always, getting feedback from the system and adapting your practice. But that information needs to flow up to your funders, because then they understand why it takes so long to create change. In a way, we are underselling ourselves by trying to oversimplify things. And finally, it's this sort of lack of psychological safety. And I think teams won't raise concerns about what isn't working if they don't feel safe to do so. And if your evaluation and reporting process is tied to performance reviews or funding risk, then people will self-censor. So I think if we need authentic data, we need to build authentic environments. And that means supporting teams and organisations to speak the truth without fear and reward honesty rather than perfection. I want to share a story with you where what happens when there isn't a funder or a contract overlaying something. And I spent my early career working for Oxfam, and we got a lot of what we called unrestricted dollars. We got a lot of sort of people that gave $20 a month, through monthly giving programs. But what that did is it gave us a lot of this sort of what we called unrestricted funding, because we were accountable through our impact reports and our annual reports, but it wasn't a direct funding arrangement. But what that did is it created these conditions for really honest and adaptive practice. And I think this is where I fell in love with monitoring and evaluation as a practice, because I got to see how monitoring and evaluation actually helped change and improve programs. So what we found was when the teams weren't reporting back to donors in rigid ways, we were able to get to what was really going on, not the gloss. So the example I want to talk you through was back in the early 2000s. Remember the Fair Trade campaign that Oxfam was involved in? And we were working with smallholder farmers grow, high quality beans and access global markets. But after the first harvest, this particular team found something unexpected, that the issue wasn't growing the good coffee, it was actually getting it to market in time. The roads were washed out, transport was unreliable, and buyers backed out. Now, this could have all been seen as a failure, but because we weren't worried about funding conversations, we were actually just talking about what worked well and how could we improve it and what went wrong. And so instead of spinning the story, we shifted the focus, and then the whole program became about working with local cooperatives to strengthen transport systems. The point is here, it's not about the coffee or the transport systems, but I think it's what happens in a culture where improvement and adaptation and working out what really is going wrong is supported over what's the right thing to put in a report, which I think what is the right thing to put in a report filters all the way through the organisation and creates a culture which is more about telling the stories successful rather than changing the programs for the better and getting into the nitty-gritty. It is a hypothesis, but it's something that I have seen across 25 years of working in both international aid, where we've got these systems set up. I also work with Plan International, but also seeing that at other not-for-profits as well over time. So in terms of a call to action, and I think all of you that are in team leader positions or management positions, I think there's an opportunity to model honesty about how we talk about impact. And I think this means moving beyond strengths-based at all costs. And, strengths-based approaches were meant to be a way of working with individuals and people. It wasn't meant to be a reporting method. So I think we need to sort of put a bit of balance back in our reporting internally and ideally externally as well, to see what's working and also to face up to the hard truths that we need to face as well. And not seeing it as an issue of performance, but just seeing it as these are the facts and what do we need to do about it. So let's change the questions to what are we learning? What can we do better? How do we improve? Remove, and I've said this to grant makers when I'm helping them create their forms that many of you fill out in SmartyGrants, please remove the words performance. Please don't have success metrics. Just call it metrics. Let's remove the emotion and the anxiety from that language, and let's just make it about the facts, like what happened. And I think by doing that, we're removing that bias. And then I think finally it's about those feedback loops of, well, if you've discovered that something isn't working well or could be done better, it's talking about, well, so what, now what? And I think that's honestly what we're seeing more and more funders wanting to know. They want to know that you've learned and then you've done something about it, and they want to know what that learning is. Resonate with people. I'm curious. Does that sit? Am I, being too optimistic in the system? What do people think about that? Makes my soul. What other thoughts? Is it something we can try for? And look, it is often people above you, and I hear that. So take that information to those people. Be the change you want to see in the world, as a very Gandhi way of thinking. But I think being able to sort of take that information and say, this is interesting, be curious. It's not this is going wrong. This is like, I'm finding this pattern. We're seeing that we're not getting a particular cohort of people coming through our doors. Or I'm noticing, this group of people, aren't talking in particular sessions, or, just be curious and go, is there something we can work on here? It takes a reframe, exactly, Lee. And this is what I think it is about, this curiosity rather than blame. Love a more honest dialogue, yes. Yeah. I mean, you're all leaders in some way inside your organisation. You may, be frontline, but you're modelling practice. And I think a lot of you model this practice with the people you work with. You get them to reflect on what they're doing well. You probably personally reflect on your practice as a practitioner. I think what I'm asking for is an organisational reflective practice here. Give Senate estimates. But we do need to try and improve what we're doing with what we've got. We're not necessarily going to get any more money. There may be less money coming into the future, who knows? So I think being able to sort of have that adaptive practice of, well, did that work? Okay, keep going. Did that not work? Okay, what do we need to do? Do we stop or do we adapt? Thank you. It's nice to have some thoughts about how that's landing. Okay, so let's move on. I keep losing my little screens. I'm only on 2 screens. Okay, so let's move on to communicating impact. We've talked about using data with clarity, sort of making those graphs, making those stories, putting those signposts in about what you're looking at and what people are seeing. And then we've talked about some of these systemic challenges that are going on inside organisations and also between the funder and grantee dynamic. So let's talk about how we communicate impact. And it definitely should be part of the change process. In an ideal world, we design and implement your service or your program, you collect and report data, And then I think this making space here to reflect and evaluate and learn from the data. And it could just be a 1 hour session. Like it, ideally you'd spend a lot, have a day or, but build it into that cycle, the opportunity to actually, and it is an opportunity here to communicate and discuss what worked and what didn't work. And there's an opportunity at this reflect, evaluate and learn before it goes into your report. And, in an ideal world, you do it every August as part of your annual business cycle, reflect on the previous year data and report through to your impact reports. And I think there's an opportunity for others in the system to learn too. And look, some organisations are getting bigger, or getting bolder at reporting what's not working. And those sorts of learnings are really useful across the system as well. So I think trying to put some time in there for you all to make sense of that data and reflect on what could be done better is really, really important. And put that into your report. In terms of reporting, there are many, many ways. You can do verbal reports, visual reports, written reports. There are presentations, dashboards and infographics. As I said, reflection sessions, yarning circles, dance, art, poems, all sorts of ways to communicate. And I think this is where you work with your communications teams. They have skills and that communicating is a skill. And to be honest, as an evaluator, I'm incredibly verbose and I love working with comms people because they can really help me see the wood for the trees when I want to tell everything that's going on. And so I think it is worth, and they're also very good at getting you to clarify key messages as well. And this isn't where you polish. This is just where you provide that clarity of what you want people to do with this data. You want people to understand how complex social change is, or some of the systemic barriers that work around the systems you work in. Now, a quick word on dashboards. This is all blurry, it doesn't matter, but I think I would like to have a chat. There's a lot of dashboards floating around at the moment. And this is a very, very busy one with lots going on. There's I can't even count how many elements there are on there. But I tell you what it does to people's brains. It does this. Like we all go, oh, yeah, okay. But please don't do dashboards with like 7, 10, 12 elements on it because people can't make sense of them. Years ago, I did a visualization academy with Stephanie Evergreen. And for those that are interested in doing sort of these sorts of dashboards or data reports, it is really worth looking at her resources. She has a PhD on looking at cognitive load and data visualization. So she is a bit of an expert on it. And when I did her academy, I learned a lot. And one of her key learnings was this, dashboards need to answer a question. And don't put more than 3 or 5 widgets. When I mean widgets, I mean like a graph or a pie chart or a card with a number on it. Don't put more than 3 to 5 widgets on a page. You will lose people. They simply cannot take in that amount of information. Just think about the way the world is, that we're all communicating in, little smaller bite-sized things. So let's try and think about that. She had an expression which was remove half the ink, which was basically remove all the lines, remove extra titles, really look at that, those reports and go, what doesn't need to be on the page? Because it really helps the person looking at it be able to see what you're trying to say in that report. And also this issue about, do you actually need a dashboard or do you just need an infographic? The difference, of course, being a dashboard has a whole data system and data model behind it, which can take a long time to build. It's dynamic, which is interesting and fun because you press things and things change. Or do you just need a static image? And if you need a static image, that's a lot quicker to do. So just have a think about that before you go off and start building dashboards. And I think, there is a number of tools out there. There's Power BI, Tableau. We're literally in the next month going to launch our own analytics platform within SmartyGrants. And they can be powerful time savers, but they can also be overwhelming It's easy to fall down rabbit holes of data exploration without really gaining meaningful insights. So make sure you go with a question to the data. And I think no analytics tool can replace, an evaluation practice. You still need, a monitoring, evaluation, learning framework to make sense of the data, so you know what you're looking for. It's good to have a good, clear theory of change, good data collection tools and what the questions in the tools are. Like, no analytics platform's going to do that for you. And perhaps most importantly, the thinking required to design a useful and credible report. So I'd be cautious, and I say this as a software provider myself, is just be cautious when vendors claim that their software can do it all for you. Ask about the processes behind the tools. And I know sometimes frontline workers don't have an opportunity to input into those processes, but if there is a data transformation or digital transformation, please make sure that they are engaging you as stakeholders, because it's really, really important that what goes into those tools is appropriate and aligned with your work. Just remember that software is like a spade. It's a tool, and you wouldn't just pick up a spade and start digging up the garden, hoping that you're going to have this beautiful garden at the end of it. You need some smarts and you need a plan before you get going. And it is the same with software as well. Okay, that's my rant about software over. Useful. I work for a software company. I love software, but it's just things to be eyes wide open. Here is an example talking of a communicating impact, and this is from an organisation in Wales, because I did not want to pick on anyone in Australia, but it's a classic example of what we see all the time across the sector. Everyone's seen one of these. Everyone's probably going, yep, we've got one of those at our organisation. But honestly, it makes me feel a bit like this. Again, just absolute overload in terms of what am I looking at? There's lots of numbers shouting at me. We've got 8,019 people supported. We've got 67 projects. We've got 7,315 volunteer hours. There's clearly a lot of activity going on. But here's the thing. As a reader, I don't know what to take from that. Is it good? Is it better than last year? Is anything not working? What changed as a result of these projects and volunteer hours? There isn't a story here. It's just volume. There's a piece here about beds managed. I'm like, did anybody sleep in those beds? I'm being cheeky. But the point is that this kind of reporting might satisfy an accountability box, but it's not giving anyone any insights. It's not inviting learning or helping us think differently about what works. So it looks impressive, but I think it misses an opportunity to create understanding or drive change. So the numbers aren't wrong. They're just sort of floating there with no context, no interpretation, and really there's no space for reflection in here. So we need some honest stories, and I do believe that drives better investment. And having, as I said, worked on both sides of the fence, I can tell you that funders are often more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They know your work is complex. They know that not every intervention is going to succeed perfectly. And I definitely think philanthropic organisations are a bit better at this. And I remember, somebody from a philanthropic org saying to me that if everything in a report is glowing, I'm just assuming that, you haven't looked hard enough at what you're doing. They want honesty. Not just about what worked, but about what you learned, what you changed. And in fact, there was one organisation, it's actually the city of Dandenong down in Melbourne, and they were working with an organisation that had lower than expected uptake. But the organisation explained to the city of Dandenong what they'd done to adjust the model and how they were co-designing the next phase. The funder's like, great, I'm going to keep funding you because you've learnt, you've adapted, you're on a journey. I'm going to keep supporting you to do that. Like, why would a funder walk away from it when you've just learnt how to do something? So that kind of openness actually builds trust and leads to deeper investment in the long term. it does come down to having those conversations with the people, you know, the project officers inside government and whatever, to have those relationships with that trust. And it's hard because you do have this thing of churn inside departments as well. A lot of people do move around. So yeah, look, it isn't easy, but where you have the opportunity, it's worth taking that up. I'm going to call out a couple of funders actually that are doing particularly well. And the one that I heard from last year, I'm part of the Philanthropy Evaluation Network, which has actually been renamed LEAF, LEAF. And they actually have government funders in there as well. But anyway, they had the Ford Foundation come and talk about what they've been doing. And they actually have a grantee perception survey. And they survey all their grantees to find out what the grantees think about the Ford Foundation. And then they share that feedback and they act on it. And so they're really trying to model transparency themselves because they want the partners to tell them the truth as well. So I think that's a really interesting way of doing things. And it's something that I'm advocating with a lot with funders in this country. But we do, you know, the Paul Ramsay Foundation, they have questions in their reports like, what are you learning? What's not working? And what are you doing about it? So they put that into their forms. You know, their funding now calls to focus on capacity building inside organisations for building evidence. So worth looking into them as well if you're looking for a bit of funding around that. And then Dusseldorp Forum is another organisation, and they're really reporting for them is very story-rich, focuses on the evolving journey, not a binary success and failure. So those examples are there. And look, I am starting to see it more and more with government as well. So that's, I just wanted to call out that as some really, really great practice there. I've got a couple of examples here of one organisation talking about their champagne moments. Might not be an appropriate term for many of our organisations, but, you know, celebrating what worked well, but also celebrating what they called their fantastic failures. And so, you know, talking out loud about what's good and what's not good, we really need to get better at doing this. So in terms of reporting, I'm going to leave you something really tangible, and this might be something that you already do, but I think this was developed by the Canadian Health Services Research Foundation to make sure that research and evaluation findings are found in a logically and consistent way, but also making them accessible to specialists and non-specialists. So a big call of mine is make your results easy to understand for everyone. And I think having this, it's called the 1-3-25. It's also called the 1-2-30. You may have heard it referred to as that, but basically it's a one-page summary. So a concise outline of the main messages, allowing readers to quickly grasp what's going on. So a bit of an introduction to it. And then a 3-page or a 2-page executive summary, a brief overview of the findings, providing more detailed summary. And then finally, you know, sort of the report that has, you know, a bit more of a depth to it around the methodology so that people who want to get underneath that surface can have a look at it as well. So I think this is a really important way to do your reporting is don't just stop at the one-page summary, you know, like our friends in Wales, you know, go that next level and explain what's going on under the surface. And I've sort of put it here in a little diagram, that it does acknowledge that structure, that there are different audiences, and then sort of that broad audience, and then those sort of busy execs and decision makers, but also the deep divers who want to read the full report. So many of you might be familiar with that methodology, but I think it's a really, really good way to communicate impact in a way that sort of we don't minimise or sort of polish away too much of the bumps and rough edges. So I'm coming up to sort of the key takeaways here. My call is please don't hide data, and it's not about you hiding data. It's often time to sit down to simplify things. Often actually takes more time, but I think Also, if somebody gives you a report and it's not clear what's going on, give it back and say, can you clarify what this is for me? Don't get stuck in the performance speak. Like, let's try and remove things like key performance indicators, just call them indicators. Make sure we're presenting both quantitative and qualitative data, put the two together. Providing that context and insights, the what, so what, now what, and making room for that honest reflection with stakeholders, be it the people you work with, the community, or your immediate team, or with a cross-section of your organisation, and even your funders. Bring them into the room. I think we need to talk to our comms team about the style of communication and our values and how our values are turning up. If learning is part of your value as an organisation, how is that turning up in your communications? So, a few questions back to you all. Something for you to reflect on now and possibly after this session. But how are you using your impact data? Are you telling the whole truth? Are you inviting learning? Are you helping others improve? Thoughts there, and I'm very conscious we've gone 10:47, so maybe just a few reflections, and please ask some questions as well if there's anything there, or make a comment. We've probably got about 5-6 minutes for questions and so on before I hand back to the team at QCOS. Slides. Mary, interesting. I worked for a non-profit and would take the time to go to the third-party tech vendors training and other workshops. One of the things I'd realised is that they were not doing user feedback surveys from us non-profits to understand how frontliners were using their CRM and analytics tool. Yes, it's really, I run the outcomes engine, and every year I do ask, which is how we measure outcomes through SmartyGrants, and every year I do a survey with my users. Sometimes it doesn't tell me what I want to hear, but that's important. I want to know. Thank you, Tanya. They were not on board with hearing their software didn't work for us. They're going to go broke. Also important to have readily available info to share with others outside of reporting. There's so much. And you do it. You do it when you meet your colleagues. You talk about your work all the time. It's just what goes in reports often isn't that gold. Any other sort of comments?
We did have a question from Susan earlier saying, are there any free softwares you can recommend?
I would be very wary of free software. Often they do this freemium model. You've all seen it, right? It's like first tier is free, second tier is $10 a month, third tier is $50 a month. And they deliberately set it up like that so that you have, you trial the software for free, but there'll be limits to what you can do with the software. Oh, you want to share your dashboard with somebody else? Oh, that'll cost you. Oh, you want more than one person to input data? That'll cost you. So be very, very wary of free software because it's often a gateway into being online, subscribing to their software. I mean, I work for a software company and a lot of money goes, SmartyGrants is part of our community. And actually a lot of our money goes back into other parts of the business, such as the Institute of Community Directors, for example, which ICDA, which is a really good service, and the funding centre. But, it costs money to develop software. Developers cost money, the product designers, the UX, the UI, and a lot goes into it. Few things to look out for. Make sure that, first thing, data is held in Australia. It is absolutely critical. You need to make sure your data is held in Australia due to Australian privacy law. You need to look at the cost over the long term. So look at the cost of setup, of implementation. Like it might be cheap as chips to subscribe, but if it costs you $100,000 to set it up, just think that through. And also, can you adapt it yourself, or do you have to get a third party? Are you dependent on a third party to make any changes to that software over time? So that's another thing to look at. And the true cost, like, is it a cost per user, or do you just buy the platform and everybody in your organization can use it? Or are there different tiers? Like some people who have access to reports pay more than others. So look at that cost modeling and look at it, like maybe cost it over 5 years. Like what does the software cost us? And look at the options and look at the cost of implementation and making sure you can do everything you want to do with it. So I don't, as I said, I'm very weary of free software because there'll be a catch somewhere. It might be held offshore, or it might be a way to sort of a gateway to get you in more long term. And as I said, they can really be a time saver. There's no doubt about it. Once they're set up and they're set up well, they can do some great things. But I would be very weary of free because, there's no such thing as a free lunch, unfortunately. Any other sort of comments or questions, or somebody else might know an amazing free software and want to share that with you, Susan? But that was just my thoughts there. Oh, okay, here we go. Mary's got some comments. Salesforce, Microsoft. Yep. A lot of other agencies just jumped onto Salesforce. We're now getting pitched by the big tech companies. Yeah, they see you guys as a market. Yes. So just be very, very clear. Josh, that's a really good point. Joshua has called out the free Power BI license can do a lot. It actually can. So, Microsoft, I think you guys get something like an 80% reduction in fee as a not-for-profit user. I can't remember that. And Power BI is built into a Microsoft 360 account. If you want to be able to share those dashboards, though, like you can certainly take a screenshot, but if you want to share those dynamic dashboards, I think you end up paying a little bit because then there's a license fee. But yes, Power BI is actually an inbuilt tool. And Microsoft Forms that actually comes with Excel as part of your 360 suite. Microsoft Forms is is free, and you can send out, it's limited, like you can't track who's answered the survey and who hasn't, especially, large scale. You can, but that Microsoft Forms is a really good one. It's quite mobile responsive to send out surveys to your service users and get feedback. And if you're a bit savvy, you can connect your Microsoft Forms straight to your Power BI dashboards. It's not too difficult. There are some YouTubes about how to do that. So that's something. There is Info Exchange. They're a Melbourne-based org, and they actually have a data and digital conference coming up for not-for-profits. So that's something that's really interesting. Well, can you talk about how frontline workers are being asked now to become data or security person for the org? Wow. That's a lot, yeah. You should have a privacy officer inside your organisations, and they should be giving you training on privacy and what's required under Australian law. And then your IT team really should be doing the cyber security and so on. But yeah, far out. If you don't have the right background and be drafted to be the analytics data prep and also security person, it's too much. That's way too much. There's a lot of risk in that for you. How do you define impact at the start of the session? Impact is normally the long-term systemic change as a result of a program. Outcomes are often like change in behaviour, change in skills, change in knowledge is often I see as, and many would agree with me, is a medium and short-term gain. Impact is normally that long sustained change. So did people get, a sustained job, or did they connect with a group of people that have changed their relationships? Have they, changed their their health status over time. So I think it's that more sustained long-term is impact. And often we talk, really what we're reporting these days is outcomes. Can we have a follow-up session webinar on the same topic? Well, with that, I should probably hand back to Nadia and Amy, but thank you for all your wonderful comments. It's been a really engaged audience, and I can see lots of thumbs up and things there as well. So look, it's a huge topic. We've sort of gone into more the data and digital side of things, but it's hard to have a conversation on communicating impact in the not-for-profit world at the moment without talking about all the software and analytics that are out there at the moment. 10%, Thomas. Oh, sorry, I need to answer that question. I've been banging the drum for the last 3.5 years, and I will continue to bang the drum with grant makers that if they want grantees to fund or to do evaluation and impact measurement, they should do a 10% of all funding should go to monitoring and evaluation. You can't do it for free. As Mary was pointing out, there are skills, there are resources around security, data, consent, information management. And this is, I'm not making that number up, that 10% comes from the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme. In Australia, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade pay 10% of all their grants go to monitoring and evaluation. We're seeing, so in international aid, this is a done thing. 20 years ago, Oxfam Plan, World Vision, we all had 10, even 20% of our budgets went towards monitoring and evaluation. And I think a lot of it came out of the 80s to do with corruption. But anyway, we had these budgets for M&E. And what it meant was we had monitoring evaluation teams, we had people skilled up. It meant that we had this really good culture of data collection, reflection and learning. So I will keep banging that drum for 10%. You need to ask for it as well when you go for your grants and you go for your service agreements. You need to put 10% in there for monitoring and evaluation. Otherwise, how can you do it? And what that does is it means it's proportionate. So that means if it's $1 million, by all means, spend 100 grand making sure you did no harm, or if you did harm, or what worked and all the rest of it. But, if it's a $10,000 grant, then get $1,000 towards your monitoring and evaluation. 10% makes it proportionate. I could talk all day. All right, back to you, Nadia and Amy.
Thank you for that great presentation, Jen. If we could ask everyone to now participate in the SurveyMonkey poll, we'd love to hear your feedback about the session and how it went. It's a simple 3-question survey. You'll find the link to the poll in the chat now. Please feel free to also share any qualitative feedback you have for us in the chat or connect with us later after the session. I can see lots of thank yous and lots of positive feedback for that amazing presentation by Jen, which is great to see. Any questions that weren't covered, we will follow up with a response as well. So while everyone is filling out that poll, I'll just follow up some more information. So in terms of membership for the Research and Evaluation Network meetings and webinars are open to everyone as they're about sharing resources and collaboration. However, social service staff and research and evaluation roles are particularly encouraged to attend. Our aim is to deliver a community of practice that promotes collaboration and sharing of knowledge in relation to evaluation methodologies and outcome measurements for community services. Our network adopts a strength-based participatory focus that leverages, draws on, and values current knowledge, expertise, and capabilities that exist within the sector. As a friendly reminder, we also have a research and evaluation forum that sits within the Microsoft Teams platform. The instructions have been shared in the chat if you'd like to join that forum. You can also access our Research and Evaluation Network webinar recordings and resources on the Community Door Research and Evaluation Resources Hub page and our YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat now. And we would also like to invite you to our next Research and Evaluation Network webinar on the 7th of May on data truth telling from a First Nations lens. We will be joined by guest speaker Adam Heterick, Bioinformatics Officer at Black Ochre Data Labs, for a powerful and thought-provoking webinar on the responsibility of data storytelling, exploring how data can be used for good or manipulated to mislead, why deficit-based reporting harms communities and how to flip the script, the roles of researchers, analysts, and journalists in telling the truth and decolonizing data, Indigenous sovereignty, strength-based storytelling, and ethical analysis. The link to register for that session will be in the chat now. The QCOS team is also hitting the road for our town halls across Queensland, and we want you to join us. We'll be discussing emerging issues in your area, sharing the latest data on your region, and talking about workforce development and how we can support your organisation to attract and retain the team you need. I will share the town hall details in the chat now if you'd like to join us for any of those sessions. The QCOS Community Sector Survey is now live. As a peak body, we use our annual survey results to underpin our strategy and activities and to ensure the voice of the community sector is accurately captured and reflected. If you work in our sector, please complete our survey today. I will share the link in the chat. And for those of you who may be interested, QCOS also facilitates and coordinates a domestic and family and sexual violence DFSV data insights network. The network provides an opportunity for collaboration and knowledge sharing in the area of DFSV data with the aim of more effectively utilizing community sector resources and products developed by the Department of Family, Seniors, Disability Services and Child Safety to promote improved outcomes and data capability across the DFSV services system. For more details about the network, you can learn more on our website and we'll include the link in the chat. Thank you for staying online and engaging with us in today's session. A huge thank you to Jen for your presentation today. We look forward to connecting again in May. Take care and have a good day, everyone. Our contact details are on the slide and again in the chat if you'd like to reach out to us to provide feedback or ask any other questions.